I never intended to start a full-blown war with Karen, but some people just have a way of pushing your patience past the breaking point. It all started when I decided to buy a ranch outside of the local HOA. I had been searching for months, visiting properties, and dreaming of a place where I could escape the suffocating rules and nosy neighbors. The HOA was a nightmare. Constant fees, endless restrictions, and people who treated everyone else's life like it was their business. But that didn't stop Karen, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, from trying to control everything within a 5-mile radius. Karen was the kind of person who thrived on confrontation. She had the perfect house, the perfect lawn, and the perfect sense of entitlement. She thought her approval, or disapproval, could shape the lives of anyone who dared live nearby. I had tolerated her for years during property showings and HOA meetings, but something inside me snapped when I realized she couldn't control this new chapter in my life. The ranch I purchased was a beautiful expanse of land, far enough from the HOA that their petty rules didn't matter, yet close enough that Karen's nosy eyes would eventually wander in my direction. The day I signed the papers, I could almost hear the imaginary gasp of Karen's disapproval. The ranch wasn't huge, but it had everything I wanted: rolling hills, a small creek, and a barn that I could convert into a workshop. I could finally have the freedom to live life on my terms, without weekly complaints about hedges, paint colors, or mailbox styles. I celebrated quietly, imagining Karen pacing back and forth in her pristine living room, fuming over her inability to dictate my choices. That thought alone gave me a strange, almost mischievous thrill as the weeks went by. I settled into the ranch, fixing fences, planting a small orchard, and enjoying the quiet that comes from being outside the prying eyes of the HOA. But it didn't take long for news to reach me. Via mutual acquaintances, of course, that Karen had discovered I was now technically outside her jurisdiction. She didn't just discover it. She lost her mind over it. I could almost see the scene. Karen, in her oversized sunglasses, glaring at me from a distance, muttering about how this was unacceptable and she wouldn't let this slide. Her drama was legendary, and I couldn't wait to see it unfold. One afternoon, Karen showed up unannounced at my ranch's driveway. I was trimming the orchard when I saw her sleek SUV pull up. She stepped out, hands on her hips, exuding the same energy that had made her the terror of every HOA meeting I'd attended. "I heard you bought property out here," she said, her voice dripping with judgment. "Do you know that you're completely isolated? You won't even have neighbors to supervise you." Her tone implied that my life was about to be ruined, but instead, I felt a rush of amusement. "I'm aware," he replied, smiling politely. "That's the plan." She blinked, as if my calm confidence had thrown her off. Karen had never been confronted with someone who didn't fear her, someone who didn't see her as the ultimate authority. That day, I realized I had an opportunity, not just to live freely, but to assert my independence in a way that Karen would never forget. The first spark of a plan began to form, and it involved leveraging the one thing she held dear: control over the HOA. The idea came to me like a bolt of lightning. The HOA had only one main access road, the only way most members, including Karen, could reach their homes from the outside. If I could control that access point, even indirectly, I could shift the balance of power entirely. It wasn't about revenge yet. It was about making a point that no one could dominate me without consequences. I started mapping the property, taking measurements, and imagining how I could legally and strategically assert my new position. It was all very calculated. I consulted local regulations, spoke with surveyors, and learned every detail about easements, property lines, and access rights. Everything had to be perfect. Karen had made the mistake of underestimating me. She had assumed that just because she wielded influence in the HOA, she could intimidate anyone who wasn't afraid to stand up to her. She had no idea that I wasn't just standing up. I was planning to show her exactly how powerless she could be outside her little bubble of authority. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, I stood on my porch with a glass of iced tea, surveying the land. I imagined Karen storming around her house, trying to rally support from other HOA members, and realizing that I had effectively removed her influence over me. A question crossed my mind then, almost rhetorically. How far would she go to try to regain control, and what lengths would I be willing to take to let her learn her lesson? That question, floating in the warm twilight, was the seed of everything that would follow. The tension was palpable, but I felt a strange satisfaction. Finally, I had taken a step toward freedom, toward asserting my independence, and toward reminding Karen and everyone else who thrived on control that power is only real when it is earned, not assumed. The ranch was more than a property. It was a declaration, a silent message that I was no longer a participant in the petty drama of the HOA. Karen could scream, complain, and rage all she wanted. From my vantage point, she was nothing more than a frustrated observer, and that was exactly how I wanted it. By the time night fell, the stars reflected on the small creek that ran through the ranch, and I felt a rare sense of peace. But beneath that serenity, a plan was already forming. The next chapters of this story wouldn't be about quiet enjoyment. They would be about strategy, timing, and the subtle but undeniable thrill of watching. Karen realized that she had lost control over someone she thought she could dominate. The war was about to begin, and I was more than ready for it. The idea had been simmering in my mind for weeks, and now it was time to act. Controlling access to the HOA road wasn't just a power play. It was a statement. Karen had spent years believing that her influence could intimidate anyone, but I was about to show her that real control came from knowledge, strategy, and the ability to exploit the small cracks in someone's overconfidence. I started by surveying the boundary between my property and the HOA. From my research, I knew that the only access point to the entire neighborhood passed through land I now owned. Technically, I had the legal right to regulate who could cross, and I planned to use it. I hired a small team to help with the preparations. We installed heavy-duty gates, reinforced the perimeter with clear signage, and ensured that everything was done within legal limits. It wasn't about breaking the law. It was about using the law cleverly. I documented every step carefully, anticipating any complaints or attempts by Karen or other HOA members to argue that I had no authority. By the time the gates were operational, I felt a mixture of anticipation and exhilaration. This was more than a practical move. It was the perfect way to turn Karen's obsession with control against her. The day I officially closed the road, I felt a rush of vindication. I stood by the gate as my first visitors approached. HOA residents who had no idea the access was now restricted. Their confusion was almost comical. Some tried to push through, only to stop abruptly when they realized the barrier was legitimate. I could see the frustration in their faces, and I smiled quietly to myself. Karen, of course, was the real prize. Her reaction would be priceless. It didn't take long for her to arrive. True to form, she pulled up in her SUV, sunglasses firmly in place, glaring as if the world itself had conspired against her. "What is this?" she demanded, stepping out of the vehicle with her signature dramatic flair. "Why is the road blocked? This is unacceptable. You can't do this." Her voice was high-pitched, tinged with anger, disbelief, and outrage. She stomped toward the gate, trying to peer through the lock, as if sheer force of will could magically undo my careful planning. "I can do this," I said calmly, approaching her with a clipboard in hand. "The land this road passes through is mine, and legally, I have the right to regulate access. I've followed all the proper procedures. The road is closed until further notice." Her jaw dropped. She looked around as if expecting someone else to appear and tell me I was wrong. When no one came, her frustration became almost tangible, radiating from her in waves. "This is outrageous. The HOA will hear about this. I will have you sued. You can't just—" "Actually," I interrupted, still calm, "the HOA has no jurisdiction here. This property is outside your boundaries, so any complaints will go nowhere. You might want to consider your next steps carefully." Her face turned red, and she looked like she might explode on the spot. I had expected her to scream, to demand answers, and she did all of that. But this time, she was powerless. She couldn't threaten me with fines, regulations, or meetings. She couldn't call anyone to her side because I had ensured that the law and reality itself were on my side. It was one of the rare moments when I could witness her fury without fear. The woman who once controlled every HOA conversation now had absolutely no influence over me. Karen wasn't just angry. She was humiliated. She tried everything she could think of, yelling, calling the HOA president, demanding that neighbors intervene, and even threatening legal action. But nothing worked. Each attempt only highlighted her desperation. The irony was delicious. Here was a woman who had built her identity around authority, being utterly powerless because she had assumed that control over a small neighborhood could extend beyond its borders. She had underestimated the importance of boundaries, and now she was learning the hard way. Neighbors began to whisper. Some were curious, others amused. Word spread quickly that the road was blocked, and suddenly Karen's obsession with appearances began to falter. Her perfect composure, her meticulously curated image of control, was cracking. I watched her pacing back and forth, yelling into her phone, gesturing wildly, all while maintaining the perfect facade of calm myself. Every time she raised her voice, I reminded myself that this was exactly why I had waited until now to act. The satisfaction wasn't just in the closure of the road. It was in watching her unravel. It didn't take long for Karen to escalate. She started speaking at HOA meetings, trying to rally support, claiming that I was acting illegally and that the neighborhood was under siege. Of course, her claims fell flat. I had anticipated her every move. I had copies of the legal documentation, recorded confirmations from surveyors, and clear photographs of the property lines. Each time she spoke, I remained silent, letting her words hang in the air while she became more and more frantic. The real thrill came when she tried to confront me in person again. This time, she had brought a small entourage of HOA members who had blindly followed her over the years. They arrived at the gate, expecting me to bow to their demands. Instead, I greeted them politely, explained the legal framework, and answered every question calmly and factually. The looks on their faces shifted from annoyance to disbelief as they realized she had been leading them on a wild goose chase. Karen, however, refused to accept the humiliation. She continued yelling, pointing fingers, and blaming everyone else for her inability to control the situation. At that moment, I realized something important. Karen's ego was her weakness. Every outburst, every dramatic gesture, every desperate phone call was a testament to how much power she had always believed she held. And now, by simply asserting my rights and calmly enforcing them, I had turned her obsession into her own downfall. The road was more than a barrier to her. It was a symbol of everything she couldn't have anymore. By the end of the week, Karen's anger had become almost performative. Neighbors had begun to avoid her, not because they were afraid, but because her behavior had become erratic and exhausting to witness. Every time she approached the gate, I greeted her with the same calm confidence, letting her rage bounce harmlessly off me. I had done more than close a road. I had shifted the balance of power entirely. Karen had lost her authority, her image, and her control in one carefully executed move, and all I had done was stand my ground and follow the law. The satisfaction I felt wasn't just personal, it was poetic. I had found a way to fight back against someone who had spent years intimidating others, and I had done it without stooping to the same level of drama and manipulation. The road was closed, the gate was secure, and Karen's temper was reaching levels I hadn't thought possible. I couldn't wait to see what her next move would be, and I knew that the stage was set for the next chapter in this unfolding drama. She had no idea the lengths I was willing to go, but she was about to learn, in ways both subtle and spectacular, that power is earned, not assumed. By the third week, Karen's fury had evolved into obsession. The closed road had stripped her of her influence, and now every waking moment seemed consumed with devising ways to regain control. I knew from experience that when a Karen loses control, she becomes unpredictable, dangerous, and utterly relentless. But I had anticipated her next moves, and I was ready. Every detail of the ranch, every access point, and every legal loophole had been meticulously mapped out. I wasn't just playing defense. I was fully prepared to turn her desperation into her ultimate downfall. It began with small attacks. Karen tried to intimidate delivery services, insisting that packages for me could not pass through the blocked road. She called neighbors, attempting to rally a protest or petition to force me to open access. She even went so far as to send letters to the county claiming that I was violating some obscure law. Each attempt was more frantic than the last, and each one gave me a deeper sense of satisfaction. I had anticipated these moves. I responded to every complaint calmly and legally, never raising my voice, never losing composure. The contrast between her chaos and my calm only fueled the situation. The real turning point came when Karen decided to stage a community confrontation. She invited the HOA members to my property boundary, insisting that she had authority to dictate access. I watched from a distance as her parade of indignation arrived, waving papers, cameras, and cameras' phones as if documenting a war zone. She strutted to the gate, expecting the usual compliance. Instead, I greeted her with calm politeness, clipboard in hand. "I see you've gathered quite an audience," I said, smiling. "Shall we go over the property lines again? Or would you like to review the easement rights for clarity?" Her face turned a shade of crimson I hadn't seen before. The HOA members around her began to fidget nervously, exchanging uncertain glances. It was clear that her authority, which they had once unquestioningly supported, was no longer absolute. Karen was losing control not only over me, but over the very people she had once manipulated effortlessly. "You can't do this," she screamed, throwing her arms up. "This is unacceptable." "I can, and I have," I replied firmly. "Everything here is within legal rights and proper boundaries. I've consulted the county, the surveyor, and the easement documents. You're welcome to review them yourself." At that moment, the drama reached a new level. Karen's voice cracked with frustration. She attempted to bully and shame, but her words fell flat. Each argument she made was countered with calm facts, leaving her stammering, flustered, and completely disarmed. Watching her struggle to regain control, I realized that the most effective revenge wasn't chaos. It was patience, preparation, and letting her own ego become her undoing. In a final act of desperation, Karen attempted to bypass the gate. She tried to climb over it, shove vehicles through the barricade, and even bribe delivery drivers to ignore the restrictions. Each attempt failed spectacularly. I had ensured the gate was secure, the area monitored, and every legal safeguard in place. Karen's inability to effect any change, despite her aggressive and relentless attempts, only made her fury more visible. Her tantrums became almost theatrical, drawing curious neighbors who whispered about the spectacle of her losing power. Then the most satisfying moment arrived. During a particularly dramatic confrontation, Karen attempted to accuse me of harassment and interference with HOA operations. I calmly handed her a copy of the county survey, easement agreements, and correspondence confirming the legality of my actions. She looked at the stack of documents, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, realizing for the first time that not only had she lost control over me, she had no legal footing to force compliance. Her face, usually so composed, had crumbled into visible panic and disbelief. The neighborhood, which had once feared Karen's outbursts and petty tyranny, now watched her unravel. The irony was delicious. Karen, who thrived on intimidation and control, had been rendered powerless by a simple combination of legal knowledge and calm strategy. I hadn't yelled, threatened, or harassed. I had simply acted within my rights and let her theatrics collapse under the weight of reality. By the end of the day, Karen was exhausted, humiliated, and defeated. Her entitlement, her fury, and her obsession with control had led her into a trap she didn't even realize existed. I had proven a simple but undeniable truth. Power is meaningless when it isn't rooted in reality. The road remained closed, the gate secure, and Karen's influence over me permanently broken. I felt a strange sense of closure as I watched her drive away, muttering into her phone, probably plotting her next failed scheme. There was no celebration, no gloating, just a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the battle was won without stooping to her level. Karen had been forced to confront her limitations, and in doing so, she had exposed the fragility of her control over others. The ranch, the gate, and the simple act of standing my ground had shifted the dynamic entirely. In the days that followed, Karen's attempts to regain influence became less frequent, less coordinated, and ultimately ineffective. The neighbors who had once feared her petty reign now approached me with gratitude and relief. The drama she had built her identity around was gone, replaced by the reality that not everyone could be manipulated or intimidated. And for the first time in years, I could enjoy the ranch in peace, free from HOA restrictions, free from Karen's judgment, and free from the constant stress of trying to appease someone obsessed with control. As the sun set behind the hills, the gates of the ranch stood firm, the access road blocked, and Karen's tantrums faded into memory. I had won, not through aggression, but through strategy, patience, and the subtle yet absolute enforcement of my rights. The war was over. The lesson had been delivered, and Karen, for all her drama and fury, had been reminded that control is only real when it can be exercised within the bounds of reality, and that trying to dominate others outside your jurisdiction is the surest way to lose.